the aid debate? It's so different, isn't it?
Well, I mean, so much has happened in the last 5 years. I mean, whether you're in Africa, South America, or Asia, nobody talks about aid anymore. I mean, policymakers themselves are going out and issuing debt in the market. My own country, Zambia, did a fantastic bond, $750 million 10-year bond last September. And, you know, the discussion is so much more about job creation and investment, which is such a fantastic story. And it's obviously partly to do with the fact that the traditional donors are having a financial problem, fiscal problem on their balance sheets, so they just don't have the capital anymore to hand out cash in the way that they did in the past.
How do you see the trends playing out in the next decades?
So I'm an eternal optimist. I'm probably the wrong person to ask, because I do believe that the structural and fundamental structures of Africa right now are poised for a very good few decades. If you look at an economy through the lens of capital, which is basically money, labor, which is basically how many people do you have and what skills do they have, and productivity, which is just how efficiently do they use capital and labor, the trend is very clearly in favor of Africa. We've got a very solid fiscal story. The debt to GDP ratios in Africa today at the sovereign level are nowhere near the burdens that we're seeing in Europe and the United States. The labor story is very positive. 60 to 70% of Africans are under the age of 25. So a young population dynamic that needs to be leveraged. So definitely we need to invest in skills and education to make sure that we get the best out of this young population. And then in terms of productivity, this continent is a great absorber of technologies and all the things that can help us become more efficient. And therefore these three key drivers, capital, labor, and productivity, help spur economic growth. Now, is it going to be smooth sailing? Of course not. There will be volatility, but I think the real investors in Africa will be able to make a delineation between risk and uncertainty.
And it's all about Africa's commodities, Africa's resources, and that's not necessarily just the minerals. It's land, it's water, isn't it?
So that's a brilliant question, because actually the answer is no. I think it's really about the structural things that I mentioned, capital, labor, and productivity. Why do I say that? Let's take a look at the African stock markets. There are about 20 stock exchanges in Africa and about 1,000 stocks that trade in Africa. 85% of them are non-commodities. We're talking about banking, we're talking about insurance, we're talking about retail, we're talking about consumer goods, logistics companies, telecommunications. Those are the stocks that are on the African stock market.
In a way, you've become the poster child of Africa's success story. You're flying around the world, waving the flag. Do you feel like that? Do you feel a responsibility to?
Well, I suppose for me, I feel a responsibility to tell the truth. This is a great continent. I went to primary school on this continent, secondary school, university. I've worked on this continent. And I think that it's a great disservice that, for whatever reason, people have usurped an imagery of Africa that is absolutely incorrect. They focus on war, disease, corruption, and poverty. That is not all about Africa, you know, and I think it's really essential. If we're going to turn the corner, we need to take that responsibility as governments, as citizens, not just Africans, global citizens, to say that's actually not true. There are more poor people in India than there are in Africa. More poor people in China than there are in Africa. But somehow there's a stigma for decades that's been associated with the African continent that is completely unjustified. And it's that I find objectionable.